Before we begin with the workshop, we'll wait for a couple of more minutes for more people to join in. Till then, I would like to introduce myself and the speaker for the day. I am Tanisha. I am from the community of 91 Springboard. And for all those who are outside the 91 Springboard community, I would love to introduce 91 Springboard to you. As you all know that we are a pan-India co-working community, and we have across 28 hubs across the nation. And we are present in different cities, including Bengaluru, Delhi NCR, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Pune, and even Goa. And about these knowledge sharing workshops and mentoring sessions, we do a lot of these virtually as well as offline, including networking meetups, founder catch-ups, knowledge sharing workshops, panel discussions, mentoring sessions, and many more. So just in case you want to, reach out to the 91 Springboard community, or you would like to write to us for any collaboration, to know more about these sessions and whatever events are upcoming in our itinerary, I'm sharing the contact details in the chat below. It is our community ID and my LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn directly, or you can reach out to us over email on community@91springboard.com. So today we are here for the session called The Art of Influencing Without Authority. And we have Nikhil with us. Hi, Nikhil.
Hi, Tanisha, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Good.
So just a quick introduction to Nikhil. Nikhil Raval is the founder of Learn Wisely, and he is also a TEDx speaker, and he has authored the book called Target Gen Z, one of the best-selling books in India. He also hosts the popular podcast called Working with Gen Z, and he has about 25 plus years of experience in leadership consulting. So over to you, Nikhil. Please feel free to share your screen. I'm handing over the mic to you, and the audience is yours. Just requesting everyone to please keep their microphones on mute.
All right. Okay, thank you again, Tanisha. Very warm welcome, friends. This is good to see. We have more numbers, I think, hopefully slowly also joining in. Fair number of you had signed up. So one thing as we go on, if there are no bandwidth issues, if we can turn on the camera, that would be great. So we can see you, others can see you, and also make that connect. Let's go to this topic. There is a lot of curiosity on how do I become better at influencing, and this is at least this is a topic that you probably are experiencing, something that you do on a day-to-day basis, but we all are in the quest of how can I really become good at it, right? And therefore, a lot of literature is being written about it. It's certainly being kind of this is a workshop that we do even at the highest level in the organization, the founders, MD level, right? So it's not something that you learn one time and you feel that you've mastered it, right? It's a continuous process. So I'm gonna quickly go through again. I think Tanisha has already shared the sort of the ground rules. Please just keep the mute so that we don't we can minimize the background noise. You can ask questions along the way. We'll also have some Q&A time at the end. If we drop off, just come right back, and then we will be here. Okay. So as Tanisha mentioned, my career is essentially broken up into two buckets. I spent about 15 years in the US in the financial services. So you can see this is the first half of my career, right from sales to accounting to auditing. And then, of course, in the second half of the career back in India, back in Asia, I forayed into leadership consulting. The last job, I was the MD of a company called Duke CE, where we built leadership solutions for senior most colleagues, both in India and across Asia. So all the large blue chip brands that you can think of, right? From Aditya Birla to Reliance to Axis Bank to State Bank, we would have probably done something for them at the highest level, pretty much at the chairman or the MD level. And here's a little bit about myself in terms of the hobbies, right? I'm an adventure sports enthusiast, so you can see right from some scuba diving to skydiving and of course reading. I also provide, as Tanisha mentioned, very good sleep therapy, which to say that if you're ever having trouble sleeping, you can pick up this book and you will fall right asleep. I'm just joking. But this is a book that I've written in 2021. It's about 15 years of the consulting work I did in leadership to see what does it take to hold on to young talent. Every company is grappling with onboarding new talent, young talent, and what inspires them, right? How do we kind of keep them? And there's a lot of influencing that goes there as well, right? So you can check this out. But the real nuggets of what the Gen Z generation is looking for perhaps can be found in this podcast, where I have looked at all the different aspects of the Gen Z generation and brought global experts, global experts, where we look at the different dimensions and also see how it relates to them, right? So let me start by just kind of asking you the question, who influences you, right? Before we dive into sort of the content and tell you how this is designed, go ahead and just put in the chat. You can unmute if you like. Think of someone in your personal life, right, who has influenced you. What did they do and how did they impact you, right? It could be your elder brother, your sister, your parents, your uncle, aunt, whoever, right? And also someone in your professional life, right? It could be your boss. It could be a colleague. So go ahead, put that in chat. And Tanisha, I think the chat should be kind of available and open to everyone.
Right, it's open to everyone.
Yeah, so go ahead, put that in the chat. Just take a moment. You can unmute as well. Think of someone who has influenced you in your personal life, in the professional life, right? Professional life doesn't have to be just at work. It could be a business person. It could be a spiritual leader. It could be I don't know, a Bollywood star, a movie star. Uh, it could be a sporting icon, right? Whoever. And then in the personal life, we can mention anyone that has impacted you and how and what did they impact you with. Okay. So let's see, we're seeing some responses slowly coming in. Sandeep says, my mom, okay, thank you. And she just says, my leadership coach and my ex-boss. And he always makes sure that he kept his promises, and that's how I increased the trust. Excellent. And Sahil says, my late grandfather, and generally great artist at the top of the game, right? English teacher, boss, spiritual teacher. Okay, fantastic. So we could, and again, for those who would like to unmute, you can share as well. But you can see that influencing is something that we experience. And Vinuta says, yes, personal life, grandmother who disciplined, a very healthy professional life, and how she faced problems at work, right? So we all have stories where we can think of that one person who has influenced us in some way. It's their ability to communicate, is their ability to convince us, is their ability to just sort of something about them, right, which kind of we admire. So personal and professional life. Now, why does influencing matter at the workplace, right? How can it influence? And I saw a lot of the people who either were keen or have signed up, right, are founding members or their startups, right? And if you're a person who joined a company, or if you have an idea and you're taking, especially for some of those colleagues who have a startup idea, right? You're going to a venture capitalist and say, hey, this is my idea, or this I've just started, right? How does influencing come into play, right? I mean, you may have a great idea, but if you're not able to influence, what does it do? So any thoughts there, or you can again put it in the chat. And this is especially relevant when you're trying to seek funding, you're trying to expand, you're trying to get people to come work for you. Okay, and let's see here. We got some responses to transfer the vision. Okay. And okay, these are probably the responses to the first question. So influencing is very essential, especially it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, right? Even in a normal large corporate or a mid-sized corporate, right? If you wish to grow and rise up the ladder, right? If you have a good idea that you want to implement to your boss, go with your boss, right? You will have to convince, you will have to share that with him or her to say, hey, can we try this? Can we do this? And if it's something brilliant, something hasn't been done, it can only be accepted provided you influence that person to accept it, right? Or try it or look at you, right? And therefore it is important. And that's the reason we say influencing matters. It doesn't really if you have a good idea, that's not good enough, right? Okay. So let's set the context, friends, for the next 60, 90 minutes. I want to share with you this as a framework, right? This is what I call building T-shaped leaders, right? What do we mean by T-shape? So you can see it's like a T. Most of us have a certain expertise that we build in our careers over a period of time, right? Whether you are in the sales profession, whether you are in the supply chain domain, whether you're an IT professional, right? We build a certain expertise with certain number of years of experience, typically 10 years or more, right? And when I say technical expertise, it doesn't have to be just IT. It could be you as a chartered accountant. It could be as an HR colleague, right? At some point in your career, right? That takes you somewhere, but there's a horizontal bar that comes in play when you think about rising up in a career, right? And that is what we call the T shape, right? And so the horizontal bar is all the things that we have to build to succeed. And it could be true both as an employee in a company, or it's even more true if you are an owner of a company, right? So what are some of those things? Things like making sure you have good communication skills, you're able to think strategically, and influencing is one key thing that you can see as part of that T-shaped leadership, right? Put it another way, here's another way to look at how you can think about influencing, right? Now, when I saw the roster of people who've signed up, I saw people with lots of different roles and industries and where they are in their career. But here is a typical ladder, if you will. And this is, by the way, written by the famous coach Ram Charan in his book many years back, where he said that you can think of how a normal, just a general career could progress, right? So if you're a first-time employee, when you're going into a system, all you have to worry about is just yourself, right? You just kind of do your thing, you take the orders from your boss, you execute, and off you go. But as you move up, you will see that you have to manage a team, which means that your success is not dependent just upon how good you are, but how good others can be. So you have to continuously influence people, get things out of them, and so on. And as you think about your career from there onwards, right, you will reach a stage where you're managing people who are managing others, and then you're managing a function, which means that you could be head of IT, or you could be the chief marketing officer, or you could be the chief financial officer, whatever, right? And then, of course, managing a complete business, multiple businesses, and so on. Now, at every stage, pretty much from the time that you become a first-time manager right until wherever you make it to the top of that ladder, influencing matters, right? In fact, a large part of your job will end up dealing with people. It won't matter if you're an engineer, it won't matter if you have a chartered accounting degree, right? Because you're going to deal with a majority of the time with people handling their issues, conflicts, trying to motivate them, and so on, right? So influencing becomes very, very essential. We did work for State Bank of India many years back for close to 6 years, and we had at the time the then chairman, Mr. O.P. Bhatt. And O.P. Bhatt was the first chairman who had a 5-year mandate with State Bank. And he said that I'm spending 50% of my time just trying to influence people to change the culture of State Bank. In fact, he did a first program of its kind called Parivartan, where every single employee had to go through it, 2 lakh employees, right? Because he said that influencing and changing the culture will be the hardest thing for me, all right? So just to set the context, to let you know that influencing matters irrespective of where you are on this ladder. All right. So over the next 60 minutes, we will try and look at influencing from a slightly kind of a bird's eye view first, and then we will slowly narrow down, right? So you can think about a flight descending down where we will actually look at specific aspects of influencing. Please remember few things if you don't remember anything out of this workshop. Number one, influencing is a process, right? It is not about just give me those 6 techniques or 8 techniques and give me that, silver bullet and I can just learn it. I'll master influencing and I'm done. No, if it was that easy, everybody could convince everyone. Number two, what works for you won't work for someone else, right? What we tend to do, the biggest kind of oversight when it comes to influencing is that we tend to look and see if the way I get convinced is how we tend to influence others. And that's where we have to be careful that everyone gets influenced in a different way. But influencing is a muscle. You have to build it. It's a mindset. You have to do a variety of things to actually become good at influencing. So there is a very small part of influencing as the technique of influencing, but there are perhaps other layers of influencing that you must understand, and you need to do them well before you actually get to learn the techniques of influencing. Okay. If you just bypass all of that and say that, just give me those 10 techniques, and if I can just master them, everything else will fall in place, I would say it won't. In fact, it'd be the other way around. If you do everything else that's there on these 4 layers and slowly then get to understanding the influencing techniques, you will have greater success. Okay. So what are those 4 layers? We're going to try, as I said, descending down into this flight from 30,000 feet right when we land. So we're going to look at the role of environment, external, internal, understanding stakeholders from a very, very detailed and a different lens. Then we'll look at just very briefly a role of self-awareness and then some actual influencing techniques. Okay, so here we go. Here's the definition. The definition itself is very simple. Influencing is nothing but acting in a way where others are open and receptive to your thoughts, ideas, opinions, and perspective, right? So this is just to get it out of the way. Now, let's understand, as I said, there are 4 blocks that we will try and cover over the next 60, 70 minutes. There's much more content, but to keep it and you get a sort of a big picture view, let's understand that. Now, most of you I saw as who have registered for this workshop were coming from all different industries, right? From financial services to tech to supply chain. Many of you were in large consulting companies, in FMCG companies, right? And each one of you today, each one of us, right? You can think about your role, your function is facing what we call the change force, right? There's a whole lot of things that are coming at us from outside and both from the inside. So we're hearing, for example, like all the geopolitical shifts that's happening over the last 2 to 3 years, right? We had experienced a full-blown pandemic for 2 to 3 years. In many industries, there's regulation that's impacting us, right? So there are all these change forces that are impacting you. And there is a reason why we go through this, because you first need to kind of understand your context before we get into understanding influencing, right? So a lot of you probably can, and most of you here, I saw the backgrounds, if you're in an IT or if you're in a startup, right, you can kind of quickly relate to this slide, which is just saying that look at the pace at which technology is changing from 1750 to today. So if you look at the first 100 years, just in that 1 century, the amount of change was, you can see some inventions happening from 1850 to 1950, some more, but from there onwards, you can see that it's no more a linear curve, it just goes up. And at the bottom, you can see basically what is happening in the lifespans of people, right? At 1750, the average life expectancy was 37, then slowly increased to 40, then 69. And then it's expected that it can reach up to 90. Now, what's the point of this? The point of this is very simple, that the rate at which the change is happening is not linear. We're not able to keep up with it, right? Just what we've seen over the last even 6 months of AI and all the tools coming and all the talk about what it can do to jobs and so on. What's the impact of this? The impact of this is very real. And when you talk about influencing. So to put it in another way, look at this where hopefully all of you can relate to and would have heard about the term Industry 4.0, right? Where Industry 1.0 is all about physical labor, engineering skills. 2.0 was the focus was more on mass production. 3.0 was looking at automation. And 4.0, in fact, many say we're at 5.0. 4.0 is really about all the things that we're seeing from Internet of Things to the cyber physical system. Now, what's the impact? Have a look at the talent column on the right. The impact of this is that if you are in 4.0, the number one thing that really matters is agility, learning agility. What you knew sometimes back is very old today, right? Or what you know today, you will have to unlearn sometimes very quickly in the future. So if you look at something like a COVID event, right, we saw that just because you made a good vaccine, that didn't really solve the problem. You had to think about how you're going to ship it. You had to think about who's going to get it. You had to think about what's the price. You had to think about the communication strategy and so on. So all we're saying is that the nature of problems are becoming more complex, and therefore all of us need to understand different aspects of the business much more in detail, right? If I'm a pharma graduate, I cannot take the view that, listen, I've studied pharmaceutical, I know how to make vaccines, and I think I can solve the problems of the world with the pandemic. No, you cannot, because we just saw that there were so many other dimensions to a pandemic that a vaccine itself won't just solve that. All right. So now, in a normal, the next two slides are very important, friends. In a normal trajectory, for many of us, we've grown up to say that our life is broken into three buckets. There is 25 years where we spend with an education, then comes the next 40 years or so, 50 years where we work, rise up a ladder, and then maybe around mid-60s or so, we can retire. Now, the whole concept of pension is kind of old, but the average life expectancy by then was only 67. So you got a pension and then you died later on. That was sort of how we saw careers were moving. But this is how careers are moving now, which is to say that the only way you can have longevity is to leverage learning, learn and engage yourself. Okay. And you can see that the place at which people are working is no more just mid-60s. People are working longer, and the rate at which things are changing is very important. Now, why does this matter? How does this relate to influencing? It relates from the context that you need to understand all the different aspects of the business. You cannot take the view that, you know what, hey, I'm a sales leader, and, you know, if I have to go influence that procurement guy, or if I have to go convince my IT guy for something else, I will just go and do it, and he or she should, you know, kind of respond to me and so on. The answer is no. Because the more you get to understand all aspects of the business, the better you will become at influencing. I have seen leaders who are in a silo, they are in a function. And this is not to say that, you know,
progress.
This is not to say that, you know, you cannot be in that one ladder for many years, right? If you're an engineer and that's what you wish to do, that's fine. But it is incumbent upon you to take and have the curiosity to learn other parts of the business, right? Especially when you're a founder, right? And even for founders, we've seen that, oh, you know what, I'm an engineering guy, so I will focus on technology and I'll outsource. The more you know other aspects of the business, the better you have the context of the business for you to influence, right? So please remember that we're kind of coming down this flight where if you know your business much deeper, you're in a better position to influence your colleagues. If you remain in your ivory tower and if you say that, you know, my world and, you know, I'm the king of this world and you know, it doesn't matter, I think you'll have a hard time, right? So what I put out here is a simple template of what we call business model canvas. And it looks at a business kind of on a one sheet, Now, we won't go into this particular business canvas because I'm sure many of you have seen it. That's for a different class or a different workshop. But all it's trying to show is that do you understand the different aspects of business, right? From all the elements of customer, the channels, relationship strategies, and of course, the back end of the business, right? And I give you a more detailed example of that just to see that if you really, really want to know your business deeper, there's so much more to the business. And again, I'm not saying that you become an expert, but can you take the curiosity, right? At some point, if you wish to become an enterprise-wide leader or a CXO, you have to have a bird's eye view of the business. The only way you can influence others is you understand other aspects of the business just as much. Okay, so here you can see the way in which you can look at cost structure, you can look at how partners are put in place, you can look at the relationship strategies, channels, what are the different ways you can build revenue systems and so on, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now my question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think you know your company's business? 1 is not very good, 10 is I know all the parts of the business. And be honest, okay? The idea of this workshop is to give you some tools to say that, you know what, if I really want to become good, I'm going to try and learn as much as I can and then fill in the gaps where I have to, right? So let's have a look. All right, and Ankit says about a 6, Sonal says about a 7, okay. Tanisha says about a 6, Sahil says a 6, and Vivek says a 5. Okay, thank you, Vivek, you're being honest. Payal says 7, Natasha with a 7. All right, so largely between 5 and 7, and that's pretty good. I would again say that, look, if you think that you are a 5 or a 6, there's of course ways in which you can get to 8 or a 9. And again, we don't say you drop everything and you start doing sales, you drop everything and you start becoming the IT manager, right? Just understand that context, just understand that constraint. And the more you know, the better you will be, because if you have to get things done from them, if you have to influence them, it helps you to know their world. Okay, so that's step number 1. Get to know your business a little better before we get to anything about influencing. Okay. Number 2, influencing is very, very contextual. Okay, which is to say that if I'm in a startup, the way I influence my teams and my members will be very different than if I'm in a large multinational or if I'm in a large public sector company, right? So your context matters, right? Just because you were the boss in a small or a mid-sized company and you were able to get things done, there was relatively less bureaucracy. Don't think that same technique, that same approach will work in another setting, okay? So what is important for you, if you think about influencing, is also start looking at the culture of the organization. Do you have a reasonably good grasp on what is the culture of my company? What's the culture of my organization, right? So my question to you, as you think about your own company, your own startup, your own firm, how do you see the culture? And these are the different dimensions that I've just taken randomly, right? So how is the structure? Is it very hierarchical or is it egalitarian? So just put in an H or an E. Hierarchical means that you have to climb through the different levels. Egalitarian says, look, we're a flat organization. We can quickly decide. Everyone is treated equally. Doesn't matter vice president or if you're just an assistant manager, right? Everyone is sort of, has the same amount of access, right? So put an H or an E when you think about your company context. Is it hierarchical? Because if it's hierarchical, your approach to influencing will be different. If it's more egalitarian, your approach to influencing will be different, right? All right, let's see here. Okay, so we're seeing a good mix here now. Ankit says hierarchical, Natasha says E, Tanisha says hierarchical, Vinuta says hierarchical. Yeah, so if you're in an organization which has many layers, you will have to do more work. Now, it's not good or bad, it's just what it is. You're in that system. You need to know how to influence in that system. That's it, right? Second, how are decisions made in your company, right? Is it very top down, where the boss or the senior VP or the CEO just says something and it pushes it down? Or is it more consensual, right? Where there is a lot of talk amongst people, among peers, there's a debate, and then there is a common agreement, right? So if it's top down, put TD. If it's consensual, put C. So we get an idea. All right, here we go. And okay, yeah, Ankit says, but if you're on the HOD, then despite being hierarchical, the layers are less, right? Okay. Vinuta says, yeah, it's consensual. Ankit says, yeah, it's top down. Sonal says it's top down. Vivek says this is more consensual, and so on. Okay. So again, we're seeing a mix here, friends, right? Some of you are saying it's very top-down driven. The other one is saying it's consensual. What about feedback? How is feedback shared and delivered in your system? Is it more direct? Or is it more indirect? In other words, in some organizations, people shy away from being direct. They're very, very flowery and glossy about giving feedback. They hesitate. They want to avoid confrontation. And in other organizations, they're right in your face. They're telling you like it is, and there are all kinds of shouting matches that happen very quickly. Escalation happens quickly. So what's the feedback like in your company? Direct versus indirect. You can put D or I, and in just so that you get some idea of how that is. Okay, here we go. And Ankit says direct, Vinata says direct, Vivek says direct, Sonal says indirect. Yeah. So it's important. What about persuasion? Concept first versus application first, right? Concept first means I have to read a white paper. I have to do the homework. Application first says, let me see a demo, right? If I have to implement an ERP system, I'm going to see a live demo. I want to see what's it like, and then we'll take a call, right? So go ahead and put it. Is it concept first? A lot of companies, like in procurement, right? They will all do all the homework, just gather information. In other companies, they actually want to see it. They want the stakeholders to feel it, right? So you can share again what it is. A lot of people say application, others say application, right? All right. What about scheduling? How is time viewed in your company? Linear versus flexible. Linear means you're you're like, if you're in Japan, if you ever travel to Japan, right? It's the clock goes 3:59 and 30 seconds, and that's the time of the train to go. The train will just go. And flexible time is, if it's a 4 o'clock meeting, I can show up at 4:10 and it's all good. Nobody's offended and everything is still fine. So how is time viewed in your system? Flexible, linear. Okay, Sonal says it's linear. All right, interesting. Flexible. Okay, and last two. How do you disagree? Is it very confrontational or is it non-confrontational? So is it more direct? Is it non-direct, right? Again, how do you see in your organization? So that gives you a perspective. Okay, so let's just get some responses there. Yeah, it's non-confrontational. Okay, non-confrontational. Direct, okay, confrontational, right? And the last one is what I call low context versus high context, right? Low context means people don't prefer talking to each other. They're happy just emailing. They're happy just sending a text message. They don't want to come into your cabin. They don't want to come and have a chat. In the high context cultures, it's all about, can we meet? Can we have a chat? Right? If you go to public sector companies, there is a lot of real bonding happening. They prefer face-to-face, right? There's no WhatsApping. So low context is all about using technology, getting straight to the point. High context is more relationship oriented. So again, which of these do you feel is your, Ankit says low context, and Sonal says high context. All right. Now, what's the point of this, friends? I put this just for you to appreciate where are you in your scheme of things, right? In your own company. If it's a hierarchical organization, remember your strategy has to be different. If you are in a more If you're in an organization where people accept and give and receive direct feedback, you can influence in a very different way, right? All of these aspects have a say. So your context matters. So remember, just to build where we're going, number one, get to know your business well. Number two, get to know the culture of the organization as well as you can. And also remember what worked for you in one company, what you could have tried in your last company or in your current company may not necessarily work in the next one simply because the culture changes. Okay. All right, let's get to understand the second layer of influencing. So far, we've just talked about the external environment and just looking at the company context. Now we're going to try and understand your stakeholders, right? A lot of you were saying, hey, I need to communicate better, and can you help me, and how can I convince my points? So the first step before we get to the actual techniques is to understand your stakeholders. Now, have a look at this slide. Remember, every company today, there is a total of 5 generations that are there. In fact, there are a total of 7. Like there are these 5 that are there. There's a generation Alpha, even after Gen Z, and there's another generation called the silent generation. Sorry, even there's one generation before the silent generation. It's called the GI generation. Now, why does it matter? First, you need to understand that, okay, who are the generations? And most companies today will likely have at least 3 generations in the workplace, which is to say that there will be some Xers, like I'm a Generation X. Most of you or many of you could be millennials, and many of you could also be Gen Z, right? In some companies, you can still see boomers there, which means that they're currently between the age 55 to 73. So a lot of companies have 4 generations at workplace. Most have 3, many could have 4. All right. Now, why does it matter? It matters from the point of view that their context is again very different. So if you have a boss from Gen X or a boomer generation, their way of looking at things, their way of their interpreting the world or their lens is very different from the context that you're in, right? So again, if you look at the boomer generation, I have had bosses who were in the boomer generation, right? And they came from a time when there were fewer jobs, right? This is the context, right? Low literacy, fewer jobs. They had a job, they would hold on to it, and that's it. But for a majority of you, you're probably in this triangle here. That means you're either a Gen X, a Gen Y, or a Gen Z, right? And if you're a Gen Y, which is the millennial generation, your context is very different. This is the generation became very familiar with technology. And the Gen Z generation, right? The eldest of the Gen Z would be somewhere around 26, 27, right? Their context is fundamentally very different, right? So they were born into the internet. They are seeing things like climate change crisis, energy crisis, 2611, the demonetization, fake news, and so on and so forth. Right? So I have a son who's in college, right? He does not want to write an email. I cannot expect him to read a long email. He doesn't even want to write a short WhatsApp message. He just wants to record a voice message, right? So the way I would influence a Gen Z would be very different than if I had to influence a Gen Xer or a baby boomer. They will likely prefer an email. They would like to see, read through it, kind of, and look at it, right? So again, all I'm saying is that the context of generations matter because that is what they bring to work. Remember, your foundational years define your values and belief. And those are the things that you bring to work. So your behaviors are formed in that formative years, right? And therefore, if you need to influence them, you need to understand their lens, okay? This is a very important slide, right? We have on one slide all the generations, and we have on the other side what's important to them at work, right? So you may have heard about this, you may have watched it on some sitcom or a TV, right? If it's boomer generation, right? For them, loyalty matters, right? This is a generation which is going to go to work, be in that company for next 40 years, and they're happy to just kind of be there for the next whatever years, right? Because again, their context was very different. They didn't have as many jobs, and therefore for them, the authority matters, being in a reputed company matters, and so on. Gen X was the first generation which sort of started asking for the work-life balance, which means that, when talent was becoming more global, they had to juggle with multiple time zones, so on and so forth, right? And so that was the first generation which was looking for work-life balance. And then you have the Gen Y, Gen Z, which again, the context was very different. Gen Y was the millennial generation, was the first one who started putting themselves out on the internet, and the Gen Z generation again had a slightly different view of how they see themselves online, right? They have issues with privacy and so on and so forth. Now, if you go on this side of the slide, you will see what matters to them and how you can influence, right? So Gen Ys want to be involved. They want positive or negative feedback immediately, right? A lot of companies that I work with, even where they have only millennials and Gen Zs in one cohort, they feel that they don't understand each other, right? So this is a myth to think that, oh, if I'm a millennial and if I'm a Gen Z, they're both digital natives and I think we'll just get along. The answer is no. Even how they can influence in that generation is very different, okay? So just to give you some idea, right? Now, again, what does this generation look for? They're wanting autonomy, more dialogue. They want more empowerment, frequent feedback, and so on. So the more you understand the lens of that generation, the better context you have. So the way I look at it is that get to know your lens well, get to know study your lens well, right? So for instance, if I give my own example, I'm from Generation X. My parents from Boomer generation, brother from another generation, spouse from one generation, children are Gen Z. I work with Y and Z, right? And the boss is from one generation, right? So you can appreciate that if I have to influence people, my view of looking at what's my context, the people who I have to influence, they have their own worldview and how they see it and how can I influence them, right? Now, for a lot of companies, especially startups, tech companies, young companies who are kind of building themselves, remember what matters to you, just as an example, that the talent landscape is changing, right? Which is to say that, this is again, I'm giving as an example that in many companies, you can see that the pie is shrinking. In other words, you could have where a lot of the workforce is either Gen X or Boomer, very smaller portion is Gen Y and Gen Z. But if you fast forward, you will see that, yes, that's completely switching, where a large chunk of the employees will become Gen Y and Gen Z. So if you are a Gen X like myself, and if you are to lead teams, you better understand the context of these two generations if you wish to become better at influencing, right? It's only a matter of time. If I have to fast forward 20 years from now, if there was a room full of people now in that company, there's a good chance 50% or more would be Gen X than some Gen Y and Z. But if you fast forward out, the number of Xers will reduce, the Ys will increase, and the Zs will become even more, right? And therefore, if I have to influence them, how they're wired, how they work matters. So again, I say that people are just looking for silver bullet. Give me that one magical pill and how can I become good at influencing? No, you need to understand all the other things before you actually get to the influencing techniques. Okay. Number two, let me ask you, most of you would have heard the term human capital. How many of you have heard the term social capital? And if you have, you can unmute and let me know, or you can put it in the chat. What does the word social capital mean? Anyone? Or have you heard that term? I see some responses coming in the chat. Okay. What does the word social capital mean? Okay. So let me help you. Remember, human capital is about the domain know-how that you have and expertise that you build in your area. Connections beyond family and workplace. Yes, thank you, Ankit. Is it your network? It's partially true, Payal. It's not just your personal network. There are more layers to it. And so social capital is nothing but the network that you created beyond your immediate role. Okay, in other words, how well do you know people in the organization beyond just that role? Okay, and how well do you know people in the industry? How well do you know people even outside, even perhaps even potentially a competitor, right? And how consciously are you building that network, right? And there's a direct correlation to influencing. Now, If you look at this slide, you can see that there's these clusters, right? And these clusters are nothing but an example of the amount of traffic that could be there in each of the clusters. So for example, you can see that there are these blue, black, gray, and red, right? And it just shows you the traffic in this network, right? Also, what you see is that there are these initials called TT and DA and so on, right? JY. What are they? They are the people who are holding the network together, right? They are the people who are critical to that network, right? So you can see that TT is very crucial to these three networks. GY is very crucial to these network, right? And so what's the corollary to this? It's simply saying that how well are you connected in your organizational network? Okay, because if I remove one or two of this, what happens? The clusters tend to go and become isolated islands, right? Now, it is important for you to remember in any company, especially if you work for a large company, you would have realized that there's always that one or two people where you know that, or 5 or 6 people there, you know that, you know what, I don't know the answer, but if you go to that person, he will tell you whom to talk to, right? There's some people who always know where to go and how to get things done. It's important for you to be that person, right? The more you're in the middle of a cluster which joins other clusters, the better you are able to influence the system. Okay? Very often people just decide to remain in their own cluster and that's it. They spend 30 years just retiring out of that place, never caring. And I'm not suggesting that that's bad, but sometimes in large organizations, you may not even have the time or the luxury. But it is important for you to take and make that conscious effort, right? For example, if you look at Sundar Pichai's story, Sundar Pichai never wanted to kind of become the CEO of Google. In fact, he'd already gotten an offer of becoming a CEO at another company, which he declined. Now, when he was looked at a potential candidate, right, the two founders wanted to kind of see that, okay, can we look at our 10 flagship products? Can we look at people who worked in those products? And can we look at their feedback and how they've done? So not only was he very good, he'd worked in YouTube and he'd worked in Google Pay and he'd worked in some of these, he'd worked in Maps and so on, right? And what they found out is that not only was he good technically, but he had built excellent relationships. And that in itself became his influencing channel for him to climb up. So what I'm saying here, friends, is that remember, if you wish to make change in an organization and as you go higher up, you need to have some form of coalition. And when I say coalition, meaning the more you know the people in the network, the higher the success that you can have to influence people. Just because you reach a certain stage, you cannot push down change, especially in today's context, right? So make the point, take the time to actually create that network, right? And you can see again to the examples, if I take 2 more people from this network, it just becomes even more isolated, right? You have no clue what's happening in other parts of the company, right? And if you look at someone like Big V, he's been there for more than 4 decades, 5 decades, right? People from his time have come and gone, but he's always there in the thick of it, right? Because he's very good, but he's also in the network, right? And he's done everything from action to comedy to drama and so on, right? So you want to make sure that if you wish to become good at influencing, you better be in a network that matters, right? And that is what also called a strategic network. So have a look. I'm going to quickly try and play this a short video where it talks about how you can build that network. So let's just watch this couple of minutes, not long, and then we'll do the last couple of points.
I've seen some leaders say, all right, now my role is more externally facing, or now my role is more cross-functional. So who are the key people or the key groups that I really have to connect to in some more profound and personal way in order to do what I need to do? They'll say, okay, these 2 people, I got to see them once a month over dinner. These people, I need to have a coffee with them maybe a few times a year. You know, these people are, you know, I just got to keep after them a little bit more frequently. And then they measure themselves. How am I doing? Have I done what I set out to do? Managers need 3 different kinds of networks. The first of them is your operational network. The second one I call your personal network. The third network, which I call the strategic network, is the one that most managers don't even know it exists or just really don't pay that much attention to. And this is a network that is very much tied to your contributions and your value added in the organization, but on the strategic dimension. This network is really more of a mix of internal and external relationships that can keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. It brings you things that you weren't even looking for because you're talking to people, and when things happen, you find out about it. And it helps you and also puts you in a position to connect the dots. What got you here won't even keep you here. We get so vulnerable to what I call competency traps. You like it, you do it more, you get more practice, you do it better, you like it even more. We even start to filter our networks in terms of people who value the same things we value. The implications of that are that we...
All right, so you saw that what it is saying is that, remember, there are 3 kinds of network. There's a strategic network you have to build, right? And by doing that, you know, more of the intelligence that happening in the marketplace comes to you, right? Otherwise, we fall into doing the same thing over and over, and we start meeting and hanging out with people of the same background, right? And therefore, it's saying that if you wish to move up, right, you have to build this network, and that's how you'll become better at influencing. So, and I always give the example here, friends, to say that, okay, you know, now is the time for you to build a brand on social media, right? How many of you are, by the way, let me ask you a quick question. How many of you are there on the different platforms? Go ahead and put in the chat, like, which of the platforms are you there? And let's just talk about LinkedIn, because I don't want to touch Facebook. I think Facebook is just not the right one, but let's just talk about, I won't even go into Instagram and anything. Like LinkedIn, how many followers do you have on LinkedIn? And just give me a number. Okay, and then also let me know how many of you actively post yourself on LinkedIn, right? Like frequently. And be honest, right? Okay, Sahil says, I've never checked, but you should check it out, Sahil. And Abhishek says about 1,000. Yeah, remember, there's also a difference between connections and followers, all right? Now, why do I mention that? So this is the time for you to become an influencer, right? I see people wait and they say, hey, you know, maybe at the end of my career, I can relax and find the time and I'll do everything. The point is, no, that's wrong. If you wish to become a voice in the industry, in your domain, if you want to become an influencer, what's stopping you? This is the time you should be putting articles, you should be writing, you should be sharing your expertise, right? And the more you do that, that's how people will start seeing you as an influencer, start attending conferences where you raise your hand and you speak, right? If something were to happen, let's say in the advertising industry, and if you've gone and written, let's say 40 articles, right, on LinkedIn, that the Advertising Association will reach out to you and say that, you know what, can we hear from you? What's your view? That's how you're going to influence, right? Again, so I try to pull you up, friends, to look at influencing from a much bigger lens rather than saying that, okay, you know, just give me those 10 techniques. That's a very tactical view of influencing. So try not to do that, and get into the habit of kind of seeing if you can become as part of the social media network where you can start influencing your voice, right? And I will also say again, just that we all tend to also have generally a higher perception of how good we are, right? I had 20 years of experience. I had seen, you know, a leader and a professor from every B school of planet Earth, right, from Harvard to Stanford, and I had done programs at the highest level. And the first time I tried to give a TED talk, they said, sorry, second round, not good enough, right? And it's just the lesson in humility of, you know, how much you think that you have a voice. right? After I wrote the book and I posted some 50 articles, right, on Generation Z. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm some expert. I'm only saying this that then TED came on their own to me and said that, you know what, we want you to give a talk on Gen Z. So I'm saying that you can become an influencer by also adapting. You'll have to think of a little more strategic mindset, right? So look for ways in which you can build relationships up and down the organization. Look for ways in which you can build relationships sideways. Look at ways in which you can build relationships outside of the organization, right? So that's that. One last thing on the stakeholders. We will look at a couple more points and then open it up for Q&A. Now, again, for those who manage projects, IT projects, or even if you're in manufacturing, doesn't matter. There are all kinds of stakeholders that we have, from sponsors to customers to implementers to shapers and so on. It is very important for you to understand, before you start implementing or influencing, right, who is there to support you? Who is your active supporter? Who is your passive supporter? Who's neutral when you're trying to influence? Right? Who is the passive resistor? You know that if I go to that group of people, you know that if I go to that individual, he's not going to agree to what I have to say. And there is someone who is an active resistor, right? And it's just a professional difference of opinion, right? Nothing else, right? So you need to be able to put yourself, your stakeholders into this bucket and say that, okay, who can be my supporter on one end and who's on the other extreme? What I just know that unless and until I get a buy-in from that person, I will not be able to get this project going. And therefore, I put this 2x2. On the one hand, you have a power grid, which talks about what is the level of power this particular individual holds in the system, right? Is it low, high, by way of their domain knowledge and by way of their hierarchy, or, you know, where are they in the system? Are they presidents, senior leaders, middle leaders, so on? Likewise, if you look at horizontally, where do you see their interest level? Okay, is it low? Is it high? So if you have someone who's low on power, low on interest, fine, no worries. You can just, you know, be in touch with them, see what they want. If you have someone who is high on power but does not have much interest now, you also need to keep in touch with them. Remember, because if you wish to influence, these could be the same people who come to rescue at some point if you build a relationship, right? Obviously, you have someone who is high on interest and low on the power grid. Make sure that you keep satisfying their curiosity, and the bucket that we all need to kind of manage closely is this right-hand corner. That means that they have high on power, high on interest, and can we make sure that we're closely monitoring them so that we can influence? Now, what's the lesson from this 2x2? Do not just put all your effort in that one corner. Take the time to build relationship, build coalition, build bridges, build, you know, friends in other parts of the organization from that power interest grid. And if you can do that, it will help you to influence when you're kind of working towards something, right? So that's one. All right. Last couple of things. Now, on to understanding. Many of you mentioned that, you know what, hey, I struggle. I don't know how I can influence. And let's now look at slightly at one more level down. So we've looked at the external environment, we looked at the internal environment, we looked at culture, we looked at the generations, we looked at the stakeholders, your network. And now we're going to try and look at if you have to influence someone from the context of how they show up. In other words, there are these 2x2. And by the way, this is an instrument. So I'm just giving you a quick bird's eye view. If you've seen this, we could easily spend an half a day on this. But what it is saying is that when you start influencing, you need to really understand people and how they show up. So on the one hand, you have people who are very task-oriented. They like details, right? On the other hand, you have people who are much more people-oriented, right? They like to talk. So think about people who want facts, information, and people who are happy to kind of talk to each other. That's the one spectrum. The other spectrum is someone who's very outgoing. The other spectrum is someone who's very reserved, right? So if you have someone who's very outgoing and likes details, right? You want to go there in that meeting if you're trying to influence with the facts, data, information, So this is typically your CEO. This is typically the board. This is typically your sponsors, your venture capitalists. They have very little attention span, but if you give them 2 slides or if you show a presentation, they're going to ask you that one pointed question. And the moment you ask you that, be ready to kind of give them the detail that convinces them. If you start dancing around, if you fumble at that point, you've lost them because they are more direct, right? So driver means they're direct and they want to get to the point, but they also want details when they feel they're stuck. Okay. If you come on the right-hand side is what we call expressive, which means that someone who enjoys building relationships, someone who enjoys talking, someone who enjoys kind of getting to know each other, right? So these are typically your salespeople, your client-facing people, right? Who will talk to you, who will get to know, right? If you ask these people to say, hey, write a long mail or, pick up the phone, they will prefer to pick up the phone, okay? And so the expressive is, again, the kind of person who we want to make sure that he loves to talk to people. The third bucket is the one on the bottom where, again, we see amiable, which means that they want to influence, but again, not at the cost of, making someone unhappy. They're trying to take as many people as they can along the way, right? So typically when you think about HR colleagues, right, they have to think about something where as much of what they do will benefit all the different departments, right? And so that's the amiable. And the last is analytical, which means that they thrive on details, right? And they're quiet and reserved. So if you have someone who is quiet and reserved, for example, a compliance department, you cannot expect them to say, hey, you know what, I've sent you that email. Can you get back to me by tomorrow morning? We have to take a decision. The answer is no. They're not going to do it. They will need the time to absorb information. They will need the time to kind of digest it. They will need to see the details, right? So it is important first, identify how do you show up. And it is even more important, do you take the same approach that you have to others, right? So for example, a long time back, right, when I was heading a team and I was having a large team reporting into me, right, I had very little time and I was more on the side, right, where it was all about like, I have to take a decision, and if somebody comes to me, I would say, okay, let's get straight to the point. What do we want to do? Do we do it, not do it? Yes, no. And just get to understand the story. But as I moved to slightly different roles where I was more a team leader, it was always about like making sure I take their perspective, taking them along, right? So I moved from one to the other as my role shifted. So if you are trying to influence, get to know which of these 4 is what represents you, number 1. Number 2, which of those then are you taking to someone else? Chances are you trying to take what works for you will also work for others, right? And that's the problem. And that's what we are trying to avoid. Okay, so maybe we can go and do a quick poll. Let's see, Tanisha, are you there? Let's try and launch a poll if you're still there, if you can help me.
Sure.
Let's find out. So we're doing a bit of a self-awareness for you to think back. Obviously, you've not taken an instrument, but if you had to just kind of see yourself, like, do you see yourself as a driver, as an expressive, as an analytical, or an amiable? Go ahead. Let's see.
We still have 6 more people left.
Okay, so okay, let's I mean we'll kind of close out just in interest of time. But I see about 50% of you are amiable and the other 50% is split between expressive and analytical, right? So it's important for you to know, friends, what is your style and how do you take that style. Now, Do you prefer to use your style against your stakeholder? Yes or no, right? So this may be happening more consciously. This could be also happening sort of unintentionally, right? Which is to say that if you are an amiable, do you try and also take the same approach with your stakeholders, right? So you can put it in the chat, yes or no, and that will also kind of let you know that, okay, maybe if I know the person across me is a driver, then I need to go and take a slightly different approach. All right, so go ahead, put a yes, no. Do you sense that you use the same style, right? So many of you answered that you are an expressive, you are an amiable, you're an analytical, right? If you're an analytical, do you try and give reams of data to your stakeholder? Because your stakeholder may not want that. Your stakeholder may enjoy talking, right? May just want to have a conversation, right? So that's what we're trying to say. Okay, all right. Last, and this is quickly the last segment where I'll talk to you about 6 techniques. Now, there's a short video, it's fairly long, but we'll keep the video if we have the time. But let me go through just the 6 simple techniques. There is a book written by a guy called Robert Cialdini, and he basically spent many years talking about researching, in fact, like, okay, what does it take for some of the most successful people to succeed in their profession? What does it take for fundraisers to succeed, right? How are they able to influence? And he basically came up with this 6 points as a way to influence people. Number 1, he says, is reciprocity, right? Which means that we tend to kind of give someone a favor back if someone's helped you, right? And that's a good way to influence. So think about a time where a friend of yours came to you and said, hey, I need help, and can you help me on a project? And you kind of sat late and helped him, right? There's a very good chance that if you went to him at some point, let's say a month later, you're able to influence him because he wants to reciprocate, right? So if you give to get, right? I think the more you can help, you can be assured that people will reciprocate back to you, right? And we've seen that generally also, let's say in the restaurant business, right? I think if the waiter is extra nice and very cordial and very courteous, we tend to kind of reciprocate by saying that, okay, you know what, they did everything that we asked for and made the changes and made this and made that and whatever, right? And so we want to reciprocate with kind of a nice tip. And there are even studies which have done that. The second one is scarcity, which simply means that we tend to get influence for something that there's little of, right? So if you think of, for example, if you think of COVID, when we all knew that there is a shortage of food or a shortage of milk or a shortage of something, right? We all got influenced. There were queues of, people standing outside. And if we see a sign on a retail store that says that, okay, there is kind of a last day sale happening, today is the last day, what happens? We all get influenced by it. So scarcity is another one where we get influenced. The third one is what I call social proof, which simply means that if we see more people doing it, we tend to get influenced by it, right? So for example, if you want to watch a movie, what do you tend to do? You go and see the ratings. The higher the rating, you feel, you know what? More people seem to have given a 9 out of a 10 or a 4.5 out of a 5. I think this could be a good movie, or this restaurant seems to have gotten a good rating. I'm going to go. So if you have social proof, you're going to get influenced. The fourth one is what I call authority, which simply means that people tend to get influence for those who have the authority. In other words, if I go to, for example, a pharmacist and say, hey, you know what, I want, something has happened and I've got a cold, and he or she will recommend a medicine, you will probably take it. But if the same pharmacist is approached to say that, you know what, I have a heart surgery, and can you recommend to me what medicine? What are you going to do? You're going to talk to the doctor first. You're going to talk to a specialist first. If you need legal advice, you're going to talk to a lawyer. You're going to talk to a financial advisor. You're going to talk to someone who is a domain expert. So the authority tends to have influence, right? So the deeper the expert you can become, the likelihood of you influencing is there. The fifth one is what I call commitment and consistency, which is all about making sure that the more you're committed in a cause, in something, right, people tend to get influenced, right? Which means that, for example, if you look at a group like Tata Group, right, they're always very clear about their ethics and values, right? And they're consistent, right? It's not that, they say one thing and then they do something else and then they go back, right? And therefore people tend to get influenced that, you know what, they're consistently kind of stuck to what they say, and we actually respect that. And the last one is what I call liking, which is basically there's research done that it is not just important, right? If I'm a salesperson, that I come up with a good product, but I also make sure that people like the individual. So these are the 6 techniques. I'm going to actually pause here because I've kind of gone on. There's more that I can do, but let me pause here just by way of allowing you to react and ask any questions, because we've covered a fair bit of ground, right from the external environment, the internal environment, the stakeholders, looking at stakeholders from 3 different layers, and of course looking at the techniques. So let me pause. You can open up your cameras, you can ask questions, and then we can all right, let's see. How do you okay, let's see, what's the question here? I do see that. How do you do what you suggested around building social networking for an introvert? Okay, so Payal, I think you are, I think this is what I call, you've taken it upon yourself, right? It's the imposter syndrome, right? You say that, why should I, how can I, put a post when so many others are doing and they're experts, and, what's my view worth? I think that's the fallacy. And start slow, start and take a course and go to a social media expert, right? And we all have our comfort zone, right? Like where we don't, there's the one extreme where people put anything and everything about themselves on social media. And there's the other extreme where they're extremely shy, right? So we want to go from one end to where we feel that, look, I'd like to contribute, but just in the professional sense, right? And I see people like on Facebook and talking about where they've traveled and this and that, right? And sadly, sometimes even LinkedIn is getting there. But do something which makes you kind of get you out of your comfort zone gradually. And it's a boundary that you will have to push yourself, Payal. So the more you can take a help of a colleague, take a help of your boss, take a help of an expert, I think the slowly you will move out of the comfort zone. And a lot of is a self-created imposter syndrome of our own. So if you can do that, it will help you, and you will realize that it's your own thought that you've been sort of becoming a prisoner of. Others don't think as much as you think. So if you say that, I'm going to have that post, and I cannot sleep at night because people are still thinking about that post. No, they're not. They moved on. The attention spans today are less than 60 seconds. So they see your post, they read it, they like it. Even if they don't like it, they'll move on, right? So I suggest to you, try something slow, slide gradually, but do make the effort to push yourself, right? And if you create the network, is where you will become better at influencing, right? Okay, all right. I'm glad it's helpful. Okay, what else is there? Anything else? Any questions that I can answer? I want to pause because there's a lot more content. I don't want to inundate you with so much content, but maybe it is a good time for us to do some Q&A.
Just for the audience, I've also shared a feedback form in the chat, and please feel free to share your feedback with us. And Nikhil and I both would love to know how you liked the session. And you can also unmute yourself and ask Nikhil any questions if you have.
Yes, you can unmute, you can come on air. Let's see, what else do we have? Natasha says, how do we know when and how to influence strategies? Right. Again, Natasha, it's very contextual, right? Most of the times, right, if you have, let's say in a sales kind of a role, it's very simple. You're going to be making a pitch to the client and you will have to influence them, right? And that's in fact very specific, right? And now what all can you do? I've seen people who are in very high-end sales, right? They will do all the homework. They will do the intelligence. Who are the decision makers? How does this company make decisions? who do they prefer, right? And they will do the homework, and then they will also run their pitch internally, right? Which is to say that can other colleagues be a sounding board, right? Similarly, I would say that when you're especially trying to speak to senior leaders or even peers with an idea, before you become good at it, do as much of the homework that you can as a way to practice. And then you get to a stage where it'll come more naturally. You can read the person, you can read the context, and then you can decide, okay, what to say, how much to say. But if it's senior leader, typically, just generally speaking, remember they have short attention span. Remember that 2x2. Are they a driver? Are they an expressive person? Are they amiable, or are they more analytical? We made a pitch to OP Bhatt during State Bank, and in that 1 hour, he looked at us for just 5 minutes. His head was down, looking at the contract, and we were wondering like what went wrong and what was happening, right? And at the end of the 40 minutes, I think he was just skimming through it. I think he was convinced, and he picked up the phone and said to his legal guy, "Hey, come over. I think we're ready to do this." So you have to see what works for the other person, right? Does that help? I don't know. Hopefully, again, I don't have the full context, but I'm just giving more general advice. Okay, what else do we have? Reaching out to like-minded people on LinkedIn, requesting for meeting catch-up. Does this work? Yeah, you could do that, Ankit. The idea is not so much just to reach out to like-minded people. The idea is for you to create your own brand. And the more you can invest in building your own brand, right, you can influence in your domain, right? So think about, let's say, for example, you are an expert in, let's say, the insurance sector. You've worked for 20 years in insurance, right? People today have such a myth about insurance. Oh, it's a bad thing, and they're evil people, and they will sell you something, right? Like, I'm just giving an example. So if you have that expertise, can you create a 10-episode story like on YouTube or on social media where people say that, you know what, this guy is really kind of demystified for me. And the next time I have questions, I can think of him. I can go to his channel. If there is a forum, if he's invited, I think I like to listen to him. So I would say take a longitudinal view of building your brand on social media to the extent that when you get to that stage, you become an influencer, an indirect influencer. And that's where you will start seeing the benefit. Most people have a very narrow view of influencing. Give me those 6 techniques. I gave you 6. I can give you 6 more. I have like, another 20 slides where there are the powers and there are ways in which you can communicate. But that's a very tactical view of influencing. I think you need to understand the other aspects. The more you can start investing time there, the actual techniques is a matter of execution, right? Okay, so hopefully that answers, Ankit. What if you are making a pitch to a mixed group? Yeah, if you're making a pitch to a mixed group, it's again never easy, but I've done enough sales where I can tell you that can you do as much of the homework that you can in that kind of a setting, right? Who are the decision makers on the other side? By the way, there is also a influencing instrument called the influencing style indicator, which talks about how do people make how do they get influence. You can give this and run this in your team. What is their preferred way of doing it? Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to do that in a client setting or a pitch, but any kind of high-end pitch or big ticket purchase, right, won't be decided in one meeting. It will take several people who have to be kind of brought on board. And therefore, I say that the more you can do the homework on making sure that you've kept and created a correlation who kind of influence the other players, then you can kind of narrow down in the final set of the sale if it's a mixed group of people. Okay, does that help? Any other questions? Let me make sure I've kind of got to Okay, Sahil says these days sharing one's deepest thought, opinions, values is to run the risk of being cancelled, ridiculed, or even worse. What brands wants it is people lowest common denominator opinions. How does one keep? Yeah, yeah. So again, look, that's more a question about. I think you want to go talk to a social media expert of okay, what are the ways, what to put, what not to put, right? I mean, yes, sadly, there are people who kind of extrapolate and exaggerate of what they do and what their brands can do and so on and so forth. So that's sad. But I'm talking about you as an individual, all of you or all of us as individuals, we control what we put, right? Why do we want to say something that will kind of come back and dent our brand, right? So let us not say that you're a cat whisker and you've done this and that and this and that, right? When you know that okay, if you're slowly building yourself, right? So I think the more authentic you can be, people see that, right? And oftentimes this happens because everyone wants to rush to say, hey, what's my claim to fame? If this person has X number of followers, why shouldn't I have it, right? Why is it that I haven't gone it, right? And I think that's where people start doing these things, shortcuts and doing wrong things and so on. So my only advice to you is that, pick an area where you feel that you want to create a brand, right? And build yourself slowly. And then you can start influencing people. People will see you as an expert, and that's how you can influence them. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything else that I can answer? Hopefully, you've seen different aspects of influencing. As I say, this is a subject where you have to remember, keep practicing. Practice makes perfect. There is no shortcut. Do not think that, hey, by just attending, even if you were to attend 2 more workshops like this, you'll get more knowledge. But knowledge doesn't translate into behavior, right? You need to practice from what you learn to kind of make it second nature, right? So just keep that in mind. Any other questions? Any other comments? I welcome you. Yeah, I'm happy to. You can look at, you can check it out, Ankita, sorry, Payal, on the TED Talk. Just Google on my name. You'll see there are 2 TED Talks. There's one on how to motivate Gen Z, and the other one is about behavioral biases. And I'm likely to give one more this year as well. So check that out. You can go on LinkedIn. We can connect on LinkedIn. You'll see a lot more on what I've written there. Okay. I will be around. I'm here. I want to make sure I answer questions. If you have no other questions, again, I'll leave you with the thought that remember, influencing is a mindset, influencing is a process, influencing is a journey. Okay. And if you can just think about yourself of investing into all the different things we spoke about, that's how you will become good at influencing. Do not just say, hey, just give me that one pill that I've been looking for, and where is that pill? And Nikhil, why don't you give me that pill? There is no such pill. Do multiple things and you will get to that stage. And people who are very good at it, they actually have mastered that. You're welcome, Abhishek. Reach out, get in touch through LinkedIn. And thank you, Payal, Natasha, Sahil, all the other colleagues who put comments and ask questions, Shivani, Shabaz.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your comments. And thank you so much, Nikhil, for being here for our community. It was a great session and it was great having you here. We're looking forward to more such sessions. And thank you so much to the audience for being a very, interactive audience and, communicating in the chat all the time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day ahead.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Cheers.